Hey guys, tonight we begin with the awful, risky, and not so glamorous world of medieval assassins. The once shadowy figures who crept through citadel halls and darkened alleys to change history with a blade and a whisper. Whilst Hollywood makes them look cool, the truth is being a medieval assassin seriously sucked. So earlier than you get comfortable, take a second to just like the video and subscribe. However most effective in case you simply enjoy what I do right here. And allow me recognize in the comments wherein you are tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It is continually charming to peer who is becoming a member of us from round the sector. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that tender heritage hum, and permits ease into tonight's adventure together. Let's be clean. No person in medieval times awoke and stated, "You realize what? I'd want to stab a nobleman in the throat for 12 silver coins, and the respect of hiding in a barrel for 3 days." Becoming an assassin wasn't a profession rote. It became extra like a closing stop at the existence went horribly wrong train. Most medieval assassins were not mysterious loners educated in mountaintop temples. They have been desperate peasants, disgraced infantrymen, ex-thieves with decent aim, or people to this point off society's radar. They may kill a man and still no longer be observed in the census. If you had been nicely off, you didn't end up a murderer. You hired one. If you had a name land, or even a goat on your name, you had been in management. But if you simply escaped records' jail, had a recognition for solving troubles, and will sneak into a tavern without being visible, congratulations. Someone somewhere become approximately to slip a coin purse throughout the table and whisper a call. And that call wasn't a laugh one. You were not requested to take out Bob the quiet turnip farmer. It became typically a corrupt baron, a bishop with too much gold, or someone with 12 bodyguards and a moat. The pay tempting, the task frightening. However, by the time someone taken into consideration it, they had not anything left to lose. No own family, no future, and absolutely no dental plan. Plus, permits now not forget about the absolute lack of task perks. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You couldn't exactly grasp up a shingle that stated quiet eliminations by appointment. You just had to live quiet, circulate rapid, and by no means ever tell everyone what you probably did for a living. Specifically not loudly overall at the motel. "Oh yeah, I am a visiting carpet vendor. The stains are dye." So yes, nobody dreamed of being a medieval murderer. They landed there because the arena chewed them up and spat them out sporting a hood and protecting a rusty dagger. You weren't the hero. You were not even the villain. You had been the footnote that made everyone worried and possibly didn't stay to experience the coin. Allows burst the first fantasy wide open. Medieval assassins failed to educate below candle light in a few hidden monastery with wise mentors and inspirational flute music in the historical past. There was no montage, no instructor, no pep communicate. In case you found out anything, it became by no longer death the first few times you tried. Most assassins were not skilled experts. They have been determined amateurs with a decent feel, of course, and the ability to climb quietly without sneezing. In case you had army enjoy, terrific. That supposed you knew the way to preserve a knife properly. If now not, well, stabbing a person in all fairness intuitive, but escaping afterward with each kidneys nonetheless intact. That takes talent or luck, normally simply luck. There had been no manuals, no guild orientation conferences, no protection briefings. You failed to get taught a way to spot a body double, or where nobles maintain their bedroom exits. You figured it out while putting from a windowsill, wondering in case you just crept into the servants' quarters once more. Poison. That become trial and error with heavy emphasis on error. Now and again it worked. Every now and then your target just were given mildly dizzy and extra suspicious of his soup. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup. There has been no medieval poison manage hotline. Just desire, herbal guesswork, and a robust stomach. Sure, if you were fortunate, and I suggest lottery fortunate, you might have picked up a few abilities from thieves or mercenaries. Perhaps an older assassin showed you ways to stroll without squeaking on cobblestones. But mentoring wasn't preferred. It became rare and short-lived due to the fact assassins don't retire. They disappear. Weapons training overlook it. You weren't sporting a broadsword. You had a dagger you stole off a shield, perhaps a garrote if you have been feeling fancy. and something else in shape beneath your cloak without jingling. So no, you were not some shadowy martial arts grasp. You have been a guy with calloused palms, quiet footsteps, and a deeply unhealthy relationship with alleyways. Achievement did not come from schooling. It got here from survival. You discovered how to kill by doing it speedy, sloppily, then vanishing before everyone ought to sketch your face and tack it to a church door. In quick, your education changed into brutal realistic and presented zero commencement ceremonies. Simply bruises, blood stains, and the creeping recognition that you had been very a whole lot for your very own. Let's talk approximately why you have become an assassin within the first vicinity. Coin. Bloodless, heavy, jangly, deliciously spendable coin. The promise of its miles what got you into this. However, the reality, you bought paid in lies. While someone hires an assassin, they do not need a long-term courting. They want a one-time service, no office work, and preferably no witnesses, inclusive of you. They offer you a pouch of silver, half now, half of whilst the task is completed. It truly is if they're feeling generous. However, right here's the thing. When the job is carried out is code for once we affirm you didn't mess it up, or make us appearance horrific, or depart a trail that leads back to us, or survive long enough to inform each person about it, so that you do the activity. You sneak through shadows, threat your life, perhaps kill a baron in his sleep. No longer quite, no longer poetic. And while you go back, are sure, approximately that charge, the customer fled terribly sorry. Or worse, they are trying to kill you. A knife to the gut is inexpensive than an advantage. And even while you do receives a commission, it's by no means quite sufficient. No longer for the threat, now not for the blood. No longer for the 3 days you spent hiding in a haystack with fleas and ethical regret. You get a handful of coins, a curt nod, and a reminder. You were never here. Additionally, fun truth, some contracts have been fake. Political traps. You would be instructed to assassinate a person dangerous handiest, to discover it become a decoy with guards ready. Congratulations. You simply walked right into a sting operation with your call already carved on the gallows. Or even whilst the deal become real. You could not precisely go to court docket and report a criticism. Your Honour, I'd like to sue Lord Edmund for breach of murderer settlement. The best court you would see became the only in which you have been the exhibit, so that you found out to take what you could, call for payment in advance, and agree with simply nobody. Now not even the greasy little scribe, who swore this process would trade your lifestyles. It did, by and large, by using shortening it. Being a murderer intended living on damaged promises, and vanishing earlier than they broke you. So you have taken the activity. You've got been lied to about the pay. You're possibly going to die. Now allows communicate gear. Overlook the fable novels and sneaky video games. There were no retractable wrist blades, smoke bombs, enchanted daggers, or crossbows that folded smartly into your boot. Your device package consisted of whatever you may steal, sharpen, or hide below a tattered cloak without clanking. If you had been lucky, and I imply observed a gold coin in a dead guy's shoe, fortunate you had a very good dagger. Now not ornate, no longer curved like a dragon's enamel. Just sharp, with a bit of luck, rust unfastened, and ideally one that failed to scent like the ultimate guy you stabbed with it. Poison. It existed, certain. However, it wasn't as glamorous as a sluggish drip into a wine goblet. Maximum medieval poisons had been unpredictable, crafted from plants, minerals, or toad guts. A few worked immediately. A few took hours. A few made you suffer a vomit for 2 days and then get better. Angrier and now very suspicious of stew. Ropes on occasion useful. You may strangle, climb, or tie something up with one. However, you would better realize a way to use it speedy, because nothing kills the mood like seeking to wrestle a person, whilst muttering. Wet, which now not goes beneath once more. Boasts. Powerful, yes, if you had one, knew how to shoot it, and were not trying to smuggle it via a palace disguised as a flower arranger. Most assassinations had been up near and personal. No time for elegant marksmanship, simply quick, quiet, and with a bit of luck not messy enough to slide in, and you did not get backups. If your blade bent, broke, or fell down improperly, time to improvise, slate roof tile maybe, rusty nail. Really worth a shot, shoe buckle with purpose. Determined times. You carried your equipment hidden in hems, boots, or in a hollowed-out bread, if wished. and you saved them close, no longer for protection. However, due to the fact on this line of work, your weapon become your great buddy, your boss, and your simplest retirement plan. There were no upgrades, no tinkering with gear among missions. You did not polish your kit. You prayed it failed to betray you mid-strike, due to the fact in the long run. It wasn't the weapon that did the killing. It turned into you by myself, poorly ready, and predicted to perform miracles with a spoon and a prayer. Assassins weren't employed to take out random drunks in lower back alleys. No person paid you to stab Jeff, the sleepy candlemaker. Your targets had been important. Nobles, bishops, military officials, every so often even royalty, and those humans, they had been very tough to kill. First there had been the guards. Now not one or dozens. Armed, armored, and well fed. A few guarded the front, a few the lower back. A few simply stood there looking intimidating, daring you to blink incorrect. You'd spend days memorizing patrol patterns, door creaks, and precisely how many stairs it took before the knight with asthma wished a breather. Second, there have been partitions. Castles did not have front porches. They had gateous, murder holes, and mows full of factors that bite. In case you did not fall into the water, you continued to needed to worry approximately arrow slits and boiling oil. Sure, boiling oil. Your process description included might also get flammade for peaking. Zoo.33. There were the servants and body of workers, the chefs, scribes, and solid boys. One wrong look from you, and they might be whispering to the protect captain faster than you may say, I am simply the herbalist. Assassins weren't simply preventing swords. They had been preventing gossip, and medieval gossip travels at light pace if it method a person gets to hold their head, and eventually your real target paranoid. Rightfully so. Those human beings have been surrounded through backstabbers, loved ones with claims to their titles, and 36 people pretending to like them. They failed to consume without a tester. They failed to sleep without 3 locks at the door. A few even slept in decoy beds or turned around rooms like a deadly version of musical chairs. And do not get excited if you listen they're attending a dinner party. Yes, they will be inebriated, but so will you. And you will still should get beyond the royal guards, 3 puppies, a completely alert jester, and 50 witnesses retaining tankers. Even getting near your target may want to take weeks. Posing as a servant, bribing a chambermaid, hiding in barrels. And while the instant sooner or later came, you had one shot, one particular ideal, non-squeaky, non-bloody ghost vanish within the night second. Otherwise you'd end up the subsequent public deterrent swinging from the fortress gate with a sign that read, Fine attempt. Let's be sincere. While you image a medieval murderer, you probably imagine smooth black gowns, leather braces, maybe a mysterious hood billowing within the moonlight. Truth, you gave the look of a ill goat herder with something to hide. Disguises within the center a while were not precisely excessive style. You did not have custom-tailored cloaks or retractable armor. You had something you can scavenge. Peasant rags, a monk's gown sizes too huge, or the stays of a protect uniform that surely nonetheless smelled like its previous owner. The goal turned into to combo in. However, blending in supposed looking like all and sundry else who hadn't bathed in 2 weeks, limped from antique injuries, and had a frightened twitch from malnutrition. You didn't look suspicious because of your cloak. You regarded suspicious because you stored adjusting your belt to hide a dagger wrapped in cheesecloth. An overlook mask. There had been no man-forks alternatives. Maximum face coverings simply made you seem like a leper, which changed into tremendous for fending off verbal exchange, but terrible for coming into parties. If absolutely everyone asked who you were, you had to suppose fast. I am Brother Tobias. I take care of silent prayer and rooftop maintenance. Even assuming you made it past the guards, noble households were not full of idiots. Servants noticed surprising faces, especially ones that fumbled chamber pots and couldn't call the cook's cat. You were always one. I have in no way seen you before, away from being clubbed with a candlestick, and in case your disguise did work, congratulations. You presently had to live in individual for hours, while pretending no longer to notice all of the very stabworthy humans wandering with the aid of. Additionally, wigs, they failed to exist. In case you needed to appearance older or more youthful, you had been caught smearing dirt for your face, squinting, and hoping no person got near sufficient to word that your beard became glued on with honey. The reality turned into, your conceal failed to protect you. It gave you maybe 5 mins of bewilderment. After that, you had to be gone, invisible, or very, very convincing. And if every person noticed through it nicely, let's just say nobody desires to be the assassin caught within the bishop's laundry room, wearing a nun's habit and conserving a sword, specifically no longer on a ceremonial dinner day. In medieval instances, in case you have been a murderer, you did not have a team. You didn't have a sidekick with a crossbow, a smart alchemist in a secret lair, or a handler who gave you coded scrolls and warm encouragement. You had a rusty dagger and crippling agree with issues. There were no guilds, at the least not ones you can simply expect. And if there were whispers of a brotherhood of assassins, it was basically tavern talk fueled by using me and tedium. You have been more likely to fulfill a ghost than another professional killer who wanted to community. Why the isolation? Because in your business, the less those who knew you existed, the longer you lived. Every touch was a threat, each free tongue a capability noose. Even your consumer may not recognize your actual call, and in the event that they did, you were already planning your go out. Companionship laughable, friends asked questions, lovers observed bruises, blood stains, and why you usually slept with a blade beneath the pillow. You could not calm down. You could not manage to pay for 2. One mistake, one individual spotting you in a market, and your entire existence changed into a dash for the closest sewer grate. Even fellow criminals stored their distance. Thieves and smugglers were sociable. You have been that guy who makes humans disappear. They feared you, or worse, noticed you as a walking liability. No person desired to percentage stew with someone whose profession should appeal to a mob with torches. And don't assume sympathy. You could not tell each person how difficult it became to sleep after silently strangling a corrupt bishop. In case you talked about your task, humans assumed you had been both mendacity or risky, and they weren't wrong. So you stored your secrets, your scars, and your weapons to yourself. At inns, you sat inside the darkest nook, again to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the door. You by no means drank too much. You by no means stayed more than a night time. You did not say your call until someone paid you first, and even then, it probably wasn't your actual one. Being a medieval murderer intended perfecting the art of vanishing, not just in a crowd, however from every lifestyles you by no means were given to have. Shall we embrace you took the task. You planned your course. You bribed the right doorman. You disguised yourself as a completely convincing chimney sweep. And then you definitely froze. Maybe the goal became round suddenly. Perhaps they were with their baby. Maybe to procure the shakes at the worst viable moment, and your knife hand trembled like a terrified squirrel. Bet what? You are now useless. Due to the fact failure for a medieval assassin wasn't a slap at the wrist or an awful performance review. It became a public, painful, and wildly theatrical loss of life, regularly regarding ropes, fireplace, wheels, or sharp iron devices with names like the Bonecracker's Delight. Lacking the kill supposed blowing the entire operation, your target lived, and at once informed everyone that a person attempted to homicide them. All at once, you weren't a shadow. You have been a wanted guy with a detailed description, and probable a crude sketch tacked to every tavern wall within 30 m. And people guards you once snuck beyond, now they may be inspired. On occasion it wasn't even your target you needed to worry approximately. It became your purchaser. If you failed, you had been now not an asset. You were a liability, a person who might be tortured, interrogated, or worse. Talk. The very people who paid you'll be the first to put out a second agreement on you, and there had been no second probabilities. No, sorry. The blade slipped. I will strive once more tomorrow. You had 1 shot, 1 second in time, and in case you blew it, the fine you could hope for turned into to die fast earlier than all and sundry determined out who hired you. Failure additionally intended shame. The silent, humiliating kind. You failed to just fail to kill. You failed to be invisible, to be best. And for assassins, perfection changed into survival. Anything much less may as properly paint a target for your back and begin training your final word speech. It did not depend how many jobs you'd done before. No one cared which you succeeded 12 instances. Due to the fact in this career, You're most effective as appropriate as your closing kill, and in case your ultimate kill failed to show up, you would better start running. So, you probably did it. The plan worked. The dagger struck real. No screams, no guards, just a smooth drop to the ground, and a totally essential character who now wasn't. Congratulations. Now run to your life. Due to the fact being a hit murderer in medieval times didn't mean sipping wine on a rooftop at the same time as the town burns behind you. It meant fleeing via returned alleys with someone's blood in your boots and a dog already sniffing your path. There has been no victory lap, no submit process drink with colleagues, no casual debrief with your patron. You didn't even get a second to respect your work. The instant your blade struck, your new process have become escaping absolutely everyone who now desires to homicide you in increasingly innovative ways. Guards coming, doors locked, horses tied up on the alternative facet of Metropolis, you likely bleeding. You had to plan your exit earlier than the kill. Routes, disguises, fallback safe uses, maybe a boatman who owed you a want, or as a minimum failed to ask questions, because the Metropolis would go on lockdown within minutes. Nobody desired a scandal, and lockdown supposed closed gates, armed checkpoints, and a dozen irritated men with swords who all simply acquired your difficult caricature, and the word may be armed and extremely stabby, and allows talk about the purchaser. Assuming they clearly planned to pay you, they weren't going to satisfy you at a cozy tavern with a smile and a thanks card. They'd likely vanish too, because an assassin who simply completed a process is the most risky individual alive. You knew an excessive amount of. You demonstrated you can get into locations others couldn't. So, even when you succeeded, you walked away with coin in one hand and a massive target for your again. And what did you win? Every week of napping in hofts, bribing ferry captains, shaving your beard inside the dark, and pretending your name turned into Brother Lucian, as you tried to combo in with monks heading east. Due to the fact fulfillment did not imply survival. It supposed starting the complete game over in a brand new metropolis beneath a brand new call with even greater humans seeking out you this time. So sure, you made the kill. Now run like hell. If being a medieval assassin wasn't already depressing sufficient, poor, hunted, and slumbering in places that smelled like goat, you furthermore may needed to deal with the splendidly innovative paranoia of the people around you. Due to the fact in the Middle Ages, assassins were not just feared, they were taken into consideration cursed. To the common peasant, you weren't just a killer in a hood. You have been some unholy creature who whispered to demons and smeared frog guts in your blade under a full moon. Why else might you be able to sneak past guards and vanish within the dark? Logic wasn't precisely famous back then. But superstition, oh, that became everywhere. Some believed assassins may want to shapeshift. Others claimed you have been invisible until bathed in holy water. One popular story recommended assassins made pacts with wooded area spirits and could breathe dying through walls. Imagine strolling via a village and hearing a female mutter, "Do not make eye touch." He would possibly hex the infant. Even your tools were suspect, sporting a dagger. Honestly, it turned into forged in a cursed forge. The usage of poison. That wasn't chemistry. That became witchcraft. And also you probably stirred it with a severed toe under a blood moon. You would think this fear might help you. In spite of everything. Humans prevented you, right? But the reality changed into worse. Superstitious mobs do not hesitate. They don't ask questions. They throw stones, set fires, and shout things like, "Burn him earlier than he calls lightning." Your reputation made people overreact. The second someone died suddenly, contamination, coincidence, choking on a bird bone. Someone might whisper, perhaps it was a shadow man. Maybe it turned into him. You may be hunted just for present inside the same village as a suspicious dying. That meant you needed to keep moving, usually. Live too lengthy, and suddenly a priest is ringing a bell while 5 angry farmers maintain pitchforks like they've been expecting this second their complete lives. And heaven assist you if you were stuck with anything remotely weird. Dried herbs, abnormal cash, or even an overseas accent. That's all it took for a person to shout sorcerer and mild a torch. In a world that believed monsters wore human faces, being too quiet, too clever, or too fast made you a threat, and in medieval common sense, threats had to die speedy and ideally on fireplace, poison. The assassin's weapon of elegance, A quiet kill, no mess, no screaming, no metal on bone. Only a sip, a stagger, a sigh, and accomplished. This is the principle. In practice, poisoning someone inside the center ages became like seeking to win a bar fight with natural tea and a horrific mindset. Firstly, poisons weren't reliable. You did not get admission to purified cyanide or a neat little tablet categorized rapid-acting doom. You had plants, mushrooms, minerals, perhaps the occasional toad. You had to acquire, grind, and pray. Or even then, it'd simply supply the goal, a bellyache, and a renewed dedication to his anti-Asengard crew. There was no clinical measurement. You didn't dose precisely. You eyeballed it. A pinch too little and the noble just vomits and cancels dinner. A pinch an excessive amount of, and you die from exposure before the first direction is served. Additionally, medieval kitchens have been chaotic. You couldn't just waltz in and season the soup with nightshade. You had to bribe or impersonate a cooked dinner, sneak in at the same time as nobody become looking, or worst of all, try to poison a meal that could undergo 3 tasters and a dog. Yes, a dog. And if your victim became a noble, they didn't simply eat meals. They handled it like a military operation. Meals have been tasted, blessed, and sniffed by means of anybody from the steward to the jester. By the point the meals hit their plate, it had surpassed via more safety than a royal wedding ceremony. Even assuming you probably did it, you slipped in the poison. It wasn't detected and the target sincerely ate it. The next element was wildly unpredictable. Some poisons took hours, a few took days. 1 minute your mark is guffawing at a joke. The subsequent he is clutching his belly and annoying to look his astrologer. And if they survived, guess who that they had blame? Not the prepared dinner. Not the taster. You. The quiet man with the herbal information and twitchy eyes. So poisoning wasn't efficient. It was volatile, slow, and complete of variables, none of them for your prefer. And if you have been caught, you failed to get a brief dying. You got interrogated with equipment until you confessed to poisoning each person from the Duke to the Canine. You'll think that in case you efficaciously modified the course of history by way of getting rid of a tyrant, sabotaging a royal bloodline, or silencing a political danger, someone would do not forget your call. Nope, you had been a murderer. That intended your call changed into by no means intended to be remembered. At Pleasant, you had been a rumour, a few hooded parent, a foreigner with cold eyes, or the quiet man who in no way completed his aisle. You may have pulled off the maximum legendary hit of the century and nevertheless ended up as a mysterious dying inside the legit record. In truth, that changed into the point. Your consumer didn't need a story. They wanted viable deniability. The fewer individuals who knew who did it, the more secure they had been, and the less possibly they were to emerge as poisoned by means of their very own murderer. So, your name changed into buried the moment the activity changed into finished. If you even used an actual one, you failed to sign your paintings. You did not brag. You failed to hold trophies. You didn't exist out of doors the moment of the kill. And if a person did know your call, that became a free stop. And on your career, unfastened ends had a totally brief shelf lifestyles. And forget about honor. There were no medals for silence. No stone monuments for the man who stopped a warfare with 1 dagger inside the night time. If a noble wanted a statue, they commissioned one for themselves. You purchased a wooden box, an unmarked grave, or if things went without a doubt badly, a head on a spike labelled traitor. Once in a while your call changed into known best, so it may be cursed. You would become a whispered caution. Don't pass the king. Don't forget what came about to Lord Ulrich. Sure, and the man who did it long gone like a ghost. That was your legacy. Not repute, not worry, just absence. You weren't imagined to go away a mark. You had been presupposed to vanish. And in case you stuck around long enough to be known, that turned into a fatal mistake because in the medieval global, heroes were given remembered. Assassins were given erased. So, you survived. You got the task completed. You even controlled to receive a commission. A miracle in itself. Now all you have to do is lay low, keep your head down, and consider that your purchaser will honor the deal and guard your identity. Proper wrong. Because in the international of medieval assassination, there was one rule even more sacred than don't get stuck. Never trust anyone, specifically the man or woman paying you. Your client, be they a noble, a merchant, or a bishop with ambition and really loose morals failed to rent you out of appreciate. They employed you because they wanted something awful carried out, and also you were the sharpest tool within the shadows. Once the job became whole, you have become a liability. You knew too much. You knew who desired who lifeless, when, why, and probably how a good deal they were inclined to pay for it. That made you risky, now not simply to their enemies, however to them. So, what did they do? They ghosted you. They denied they ever met you. Or worse, they dispatched a person else when you too easy up to tie off the agreement with something sharper than ink. There were even cases where customers double-booked, hiring one assassin to do the job and another to kill the primary one right away after. No refunds, simply decreased chance. And in case you dared try to blackmail a client, threatened to expose them, that turned into ambitious. And additionally, your final mistake. Because effective human beings inside the center a long time didn't negotiate with assassins. They overwhelmed them. In case your client had a shred of honor, an unprecedented species indeed, you may receive a commission and left on my own. But even then, you'd nevertheless need to expect they were looking you from a distance, with a person already polishing metallic and memorizing your stroll. You have been the secret that could not communicate, the shadow that couldn't live. Even success wasn't sufficient to earn accept as true with, because in their eyes, if you killed as soon as, you could kill once more. And no person, now not even the person that employed you, wanted to be next. Let's assume somehow you beat the percentages. You survived the kills, the lies, the poisonings, the betrayals. You outlived your enemies, your employers, and probably your personal experience of morality. Now what? You retire. Certainly now not. Due to the fact in medieval times, assassins didn't get retirement plans. There were no farewell banquets, no quiet cottages by the ocean, no pensions paid in gold coins and thankful whispers. You didn't fade into a non-violent lifestyles. You vanished or you died regularly each. The hassle became simple. You were never safe. Even if you walked far from the task, your past didn't. You had too many secrets and techniques to your head, too many names to your reminiscence, and too much blood on your palms. Humans didn't need you retired. They wanted you forgotten, which typically supposed buried. Or even if no person came when you, and that's a big if, you had to stay with a regular worry that a person would possibly. That a new assassin, young and keen to show himself, had simply received a contract for a shadowy discern who used to be a person risky. So, you changed your call again. You moved to a village in which no person requested questions. You faked a limp, bought herbs, pretended you as soon as worked as a protect. But even then, you did not sleep properly. You averted crowds. You always sat going through the door. You kept your dagger beneath the floorboards subsequent to the pouch of cash you in no way touched, because it nevertheless smelled just like the man you earned it from. And also you couldn't believe yourself both. Years of silent killings and quick escapes did something in your mind. Every knock at the door made you cringe. Every stranger on the road may recognize you. You stopped dreaming due to the fact dreaming changed into risky. You could not love. You could not loosen up. You couldn't giggle too loud. You lived like a ghost pretending to be a man. The truth became there was no endgame for a medieval murderer. Just a slow, cold fade into obscurity. Usually transferring, always looking, until at some point you slipped into the dark and no person observed. And perhaps that was the quality you could wish for. Via now, you've likely figured it out. Being a medieval assassin wasn't darkly romantic. It wasn't noble. It wasn't even all that worthwhile. It was a grim, thankless, quick, lived profession wrapped in blood-stained linen, and followed by way of a crowd of those who desired you lifeless. You wouldn't remaining, not a week, maybe no longer even a day, due to the fact you'll begin with the incorrect assumptions. That you'd be glossy, on top of things, a whisper inside the darkish. But what you'd genuinely be is bloodless, hungry, and one bad bet far from the noose. You would slip into city, cloak pulled tight, geared up for movement, only to find out that your goal moved places. The guards are under the influence of alcohol, however cause, happy. And the stable boy you paid for information just sold you out for a mug of ale and a bit of bread. You'll freeze at the incorrect time. Stab the incorrect guy. Get noticed with the aid of someone's maid who once saw your face close to the chapel. And you're not a shadow, you're the trouble. Then what? You run. But you're now not used to medieval terrain. The mud, the uneven cobblestones, the truly insane number of unfastened chickens in the street. You slip, fall, get tackled through a defend named Thomas who just were given dumped and is looking for an outlet. And let's say you live to tell the tale that. You then address the aftermath. No allies, no honor, and no future. Just whispers, suspicion, and the developing attention that even if you be triumphant, the exceptional you could hope for is to die vintage and by myself, hiding at the back of a fake call in a village that still believes in fairies. So no, you wouldn't ultimate. And I'll bait, you should not attempt due to the fact the assassin's life wasn't cool. It became a cruel gadget that chewed human beings up and spat out not anything but shadows. It offered power without peace and cause without a place within the global. You did not make history. You erased yourself from it. And the only thing looking ahead to you at the quit turned into silence. A silence no one would question, because no one even remembered you were there inside the first area. Earlier than she changed into the dreaded Queen of Macedonia, Olympus changed into referred to as Myrtale, a Melian princess from the rugged tribal lands of Epirus. Her humans claimed descent from Achilles himself, and whether or now not the blood of heroes actually ran in her veins, one aspect turned into shore. This turned into not a girl born for the sidelines of records. From a young age, Myrtle became steeped in thriller and formality. Her upbringing became formed now not simply with the aid of politics, but by using prophecy, ecstatic rites, and a reverence for the ancient gods. She wasn't the form of princess who smiled and embroidered tapestries. No, she turned into attracted to serpents' omens and the frenzied ceremonies of the cult of Dionysus, in which women danced barefoot within the moonlight and called upon the divine in states of trance. Her connection to the gods wasn't performative, it became personal. She did not merely worship, she embodied, in line with historical resources, likely written by means of men each terrified and enthralled. She saved sacred snakes in her chambers or even allowed them to coil beside her in bed. Whether or not this was a literal fact or the form of slander that powerful women entice like flies, we will never recognize, but it caught. To her allies, it made her divine. To her enemies, it made her risky. Her real energy started no longer in a battlefield or throne room, but within the uneasy flicker of torchlight, some of the whispers of priestesses and the curling our bodies of serpents. She wasn't just a princess. She became a dwelling oracle, a girl touched by using something older than politics and colder than metal. So whilst Philip II of Macedon, brutal, superb, and famously horny, arrived at the island of Samothrace for a non-secular initiation, he didn't simply meet a stunning princess. He met a thriller he couldn't withstand. Their marriage wasn't just a political alliance. It changed into a collision of prophecy and power. And from the very beginning, it became complete of omens. A few stated lightning struck the sky on their wedding ceremony night. Others claimed Olympias dreamed of a thunderbolt entering her womb. All of it would turn out to be legend. But one factor is certain. The union of Olympias and Philip didn't simply create a child. It created Alexander the Fantastic. And she intended to form his destiny from the very first breath. Olympia's marriage to Philip II became, now not the fairy story one would possibly anticipate for a queen, who could at some point beginning an empire. From the beginning, it was a flammable blend of prophecy, delight, and paranoia. Philip, ruthless, charismatic, and already accumulating wives like trophies, married Olympias around 357 BCE. She changed into probably only a teenager, but she wasn't naive. She noticed in Philip a man whose ambition matched her personal, and perhaps even a divine fit for her non-secular destiny. Macedon wasn't exactly an easy nation to stroll into. It was a land of iron and ambition where kings have been killed by using cousins and brothers was opponents overnight. But Olympias, the priestess of Papyrus, walked in with her head held high and eyes already on the crown. Their marriage was rocky from the start. Philip, for all his political genius, became not built for monogamy. He could move on to marry a couple of girls, frequently for alliances, always for power. But Olympias wasn't one to take a seat quietly within the shadows. She held her own courtroom, maintained her personal alliances, and became acknowledged to show to oracles and rites to divine her future, and perhaps Philip's fate. Then came the delivery of Alexander. Even that changed into wrapped in celestial drama. Legends say Olympus dreamed that a thunderbolt struck her womb, and that flames danced around her child without burning him. Philip reportedly had a imaginative and prescient of sealing his spouse's womb with a lion. Yes, a literal lion. Whether they believed these visions or invented them, they surely acted as if Alexander become destined to rule no longer just a state but the world. However, whilst the child became celebrated, cracks in the royal marriage deepened. Olympus resented Philip's different wives, particularly his Macedonian bride, Cleopatra Eurydice, whom he married later in existence. This turned into greater than a domestic trouble. It became a danger. Cleopatra became Macedonian-born, and any son she bore would be purer in the eyes of the aristocracy. A right-away danger to Alexander's destiny. Olympia saw it in reality. The palace wasn't just a domestic, it became a battlefield, and she would use every snake, dream, ritual, and whisper she needed to make sure her son wasn't simply remembered, however topped. She became no longer Myrtle. She turned into Olympus now, and nobody could take her son's throne without going through her wrath. By the point Alexander turned into a teen, the Macedonian palace in Pella had ended up a warfare region of veiled insults, political maneuvering, and bitter rivalries. Olympus wasn't simply fighting for have an effect on. She became fighting for survival. She knew that the court turned into pact with snakes. But she turned into the one who taught them how to chew. Philip had began to distance himself from her. He became campaigning more, drinking extra, and perhaps worst of all, listening extra to his Macedonian advisors. The very last blow got here, while he married a young noble female named Cleopatra Eurydice, now not to be stressed with the Cleopatra of Egypt. This Cleopatra became Macedonian-born, and her uncle Attalus was one in all Philip's pinnacle generals. To Olympias, it wasn't just betrayal, it was a assertion of conflict. The wedding ceremony changed into a catastrophe. On the dinner party, Attalus drunkenly mocked Olympus and Alexander, calling into query the legitimacy of Alexander's birth. Changed into he honestly Philip's son, or changed into he the kid of a god, as Olympus preferred to assert. It turned into meant as an insult, but Olympia seized the myth, let them whisper, allow them to accept as true with her son changed into touched with the aid of Zeus. It made him untouchable. Alexander stormed out of the feast. Olympia left Macedon absolutely, withdrawing to Apris. However, her exile was now not defeat, it turned into approach. In her place of origin, she changed into nonetheless royalty. She may want to gather help, whisper in ears, and watch as Philip's palace started out to rot from inside. She didn't want to be physically present to be dangerous. Then came the surprise wave. Philip changed into assassinated at his daughter's wedding ceremony, simply as he turned into approximately to invade Persia. Just as he became on the verge of crowning himself, now not simply king of Macedon, however capacity emperor of the known international. The question that echoed through each marble corridor and torch-lit hall was the identical. Who did it? Was it Pausanias, the jilted bodyguard who accomplished the act, become it the end result of court intrigue, turned into it Alexander himself, or whisper it softly, became it Olympus? No person should prove it. Nobody dared, however many believed it. In the end, within days, Cleopatra Eurydice and her new child toddler were useless. Murdered, some say, through Olympus herself. The serpent had lower back to the palace, and now nothing stood among her son and the throne. With Philip lifeless and Macedon in mourning or confusion, Olympias made her move. Whilst others scrambled to understand the chaos, she acted hastily, brutally, decisively. First, Cleopatra Eurydice, the younger Macedonian queen and rival wife, changed into removed. According to chilling bills, Olympus did not just have her killed, she made her dying symbolic, public, humiliating. A few say Cleopatra turned into forced to dangle herself, after watching her little one daughter be murdered. Others claim Olympus had the child thrown onto a funeral pyre. What is agreed upon is that no mercy becomes shown. Olympia understood what many mothers in historic courts refused to simply accept. In a royal palace, mercy is a liability. A rival baby, no matter how small, is a destiny warfare. And Olympias turned into done gambling protection. With Cleopatra and her bloodline erased, she should flip her attention to securing Alexander's throne. Her teenage son, bold, brilliant, already skilled with the aid of Aristotle, was declared king without severe competition. However, do not be fooled. It wasn't simply his aura or his father's legacy that made it feasible. It was Olympus. She knew which generals to threaten, which nobles to flatter, and which enemies to quietly take away. She wasn't just protecting her son's upward push, she turned into engineering it. Alexander himself didn't always approve. He reportedly disapproved of the violence against Cleopatra's own family. However, he additionally failed to forestall it, because deep down he knew what Olympias had always recognized: strength demands blood, and in Macedon, bloodlines had been each a blessing and a curse. Along with her son now king, Olympias started out to recede barely from public existence, but this changed into no retirement. She actually shifted from open moves to whispered effect. As Alexander organized to launch his conquest of Persia, she remained in the back of, no longer as a passive queen mother, but as the religious mum or dad of his destiny. She dispatched him sacred relics, consulted oracles, and accomplished rituals on his behalf, to Olympus. Her son's assignment wasn't simply navy, it turned into divine. Alexander wasn't going to conflict. He became pleasant prophecy, and as long as she drew breath, no rival, Macedonian, Persian, or in any other case, would derail that divine plan. She had crowned her son. She had cleansed the palace. Now she might protect his empire. From backstage with teeth bared. As Alexander marched east to triumph over the regarded world, Olympus remained at the back of in Macedon. A queen without a throne but not without strength. Her official title became Queen Mother. But make no mistake, she ruled in all but name. Though regency became technically passed to Antipater, considered one of Alexander's relied on generals, Olympus refused to be sidelined. She wrote letters to her son continuously advising, caution, every so often chastising him. These weren't the sweet letters of a doting mom. They have been political briefings laced with oracles and venom. And Alexander, heaps of miles away, examined every word. She reminded him who his proper enemies had been. She wondered the loyalty of his companions. She criticized his fascination with Persian customs, his choice of better halves, and his flirtation with calling himself a god. No person else dared say this stuff to him. But Olympias became never afraid to speak as a mom or a priestess of divine will. Again in Macedon, Antipater grew increasingly resentful. Olympia undermined him at every turn. She used her reputation, her religious authority, and her circle of relatives' ties to stir competition against him. She had effect in Epirus, in Thessaly, and amongst the aristocracy. She may want to spread rumors like wildfire, and with Olympus, a whisper will be deadlier than a sword. In the meantime, her letters to Alexander have become greater urgent. She warned him of Antipat's ambition, painting him as a toady Philip, ready to betray and usurp. Whether or not she truly believed it or truly feared losing her grip, she kept urging her son to act. Alexander but hesitated. He wanted Antipater to maintain order in Greece even as he fought in Asia, and so the rift among mother and trendy widened. Olympia watched. She waited. But below her religious robes and maternal problem, she became growing impatient. She hadn't continued years of palace struggle to be dominated over by way of an antique soldier. As Alexander's empire stretched from the Aegean to India, Olympia noticed cracks forming. He became taking over an excessive amount of trusting too many overseas advisors and drifting away from the mom and the gods that made him. She believed his victories came from divine prefer and from her. And if he forgot that, nicely, Olympus knew a way to remind kings who they in reality had been, despite the fact that that king turned into her very own son. Whilst news of Alexander's dying in Babylon reached Macedon in 323 BCE, it didn't arrive like a trumpet. It arrived like a dagger. For Olympus, it wasn't just the lack of a son. It turned into the collapse of an international she had spent a long time constructing. Her boy, the divine hurricane she had prophesied, raised, unleashed, become gone. And he'd left behind no clear heir, no unmarried successor, simplest chaos. The potent empire he carved out became already fracturing. Generals, his soap known as successors, had been already dividing it up like jackals around a corpse. Antipater nonetheless held electricity in Macedon and Greece, and he had no love for Olympus. Worse, her daughter Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, became being courted by using rival generals for marriage, everyone hoping to use her bloodline as a claim to the throne. Olympia noticed what became coming. Civil conflict wasn't a possibility. it become inevitable. And once again, she could ought to act. However, she not had Alexander. What she had rather become his bloodline. His younger son, Alexander IV, born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess Alexander had married. Roxana, nonetheless in Macedon, became susceptible. The boy changed into even extra so. Olympus diagnosed that the toddler turned into now the last actual piece of her son's legacy, and that made him a goal. But it additionally made him a weapon. She allied herself with Roxana and the boy, decided to guard them, and use the child's birthright to stake her very own claim in the political battlefield. But the tide became turning. The generals who as soon as bowed to Alexander had no hobby in kneeling to his widow or his mom. They had armies now, pursuits and grudges. Olympus did not balk. She'd confronted snakes, traitors and kings. A few warlords with crowns and stolen spears would not scare her. So she plotted. She waited. She watched as Antipater died and became changed by using his son, Cassander, a man with ice in his veins and no tolerance for the old queen's games. It changed into handiest account number of time earlier than these two forces collided. The serpent mom of Alexander and the cold-eyed consumer who desired her buried. Alexander become gone, but his shadow turned into nonetheless shifting, and Olympus was nonetheless coiled within it, equipped to strike. Years after Alexander's demise, at the same time as his empire crumbled into civil warfare, Olympia made her most audacious circulate but she again to Macedon, not as a grieving mom, but as a political force of divine fury. The regency had been splintered. Cassandra, the son of her vintage enemy, Antipa, was seizing energy, and Roxana, along with younger Alexander IV, turned into efficaciously imprisoned. Olympia noticed the writing at the wall. If she did no longer act now, her grandson might vanish like a shadow at dusk. So she made address Polyperchon, and getting old-fashionable, who nonetheless held a flicker of legitimate authority. Olympus might return, now not to plead, but to rule. With Polypon's backing, she entered Macedon at the pinnacle of an army, and the instant her feet touched domestic soil, the whole lot modified. Towns opened their gates. Squaddies defected to her facet. Even some of her vintage enemies hesitated. Olympia's, notwithstanding her age, was still a name that shook the floor. Then came her vengeance. One by one she hunted down the loyalists of Cassander, and when she sooner or later stuck Philippa Thui, Aradus, Alexander's mentally impaired half-brother and puppet king, she ordered his execution. According to a few assets, his spouse Eurydice changed into captured and given the opportunity to kill herself. Whilst she refused, Olympus had her strangled. It was brutality veiled in royal protocol, and Olympus, ever theatrical, staged the scene like a goddess delivering justice. Her message was clean. Most effective, the bloodline of Alexander had the right to rule. Each person else changed into a pretender. For a quick, burning moment, Olympia held the dominion in her grip. She had restored the dynasty. She had avenged betrayals. She had reminded Macedon what royal strength looked like while wielded via a woman, with not anything left to lose. However, electricity in Macedon was like fire in dry grass, and Cassander turned into nevertheless obtainable calculating, biding his time. He lower back with a vengeance. His navy outnumbered hers, his assets deeper, his cruelty less warm. Her allies commenced to abandon her. Polyperon misplaced have an impact on. The tide became. Olympus, now remoted in the fort of Pydna, watched as her enemies closed in. She had lit the inn shape. Macedon had burned, and now the smoke was thick, and her enemies were at the gates. Olympus, as soon as the maximum feared lady inside the historic world, now discovered herself besieged inside the coastal citadel of Pydna, by myself, reduce off, surrounded by means of the military of Cassandra, who had come to finish what his father had commenced. However, Olympias did not beg. She did not plead. For nearly a hour she endured the siege like a statue carved from divine wrath. Meals ran quick. Disorder crept in. Allies vanished. Yet inside the citadel partitions, she maintained the identical unshakable presence that had once shaken kings. To the very stop, she carried herself no longer as a prisoner, however as the mom of a god. Cassandra, ever careful, hesitated. He knew killing Olympus turned into dangerous. Even now, she carried a fantasy around her like armor. She changed into nonetheless the mother of Alexander the Exquisite. To strike her down would possibly appear like blasphemy. So, he provided her protection. Surrender, he said, and her lifestyles might be spared. Olympia knew better. She had visible too many royal guarantees turned to ash. Nonetheless, hunger changed into no longer just a pain. It was loss of life. Her garrison broke. Her followers surrendered. And Olympias, unbending till the very quit, was ultimately surpassed over to her enemies. Cassandra didn't kill her himself. That might were too easy and too merciful. As a substitute, he became her over to the families of those she had performed for the duration of her short return to power. Allow them to decide her destiny. They condemned her to demise. But here's the catch. When the executioners came, nobody dared strike the first blow. Olympia stood tall, regal, silent, eyes fixed on them like an oracle staring through smoke. These had been Macedonians. They'd grown up hearing of her rituals, her visions, her snakes, that they had as soon as cheered her son as a dwelling god. And now here she stood, a frail old woman cloaked in myth, and not a single man had the courage to swing the sword. So Cassandra dispatched others, foreigners, outsiders, folks who had no memory of her strength, simplest orders to observe. And for that reason, Olympus changed into eventually struck down. Now not with right, no longer with dignity, however with silence. Her dying marked the end of Alexander's bloodline in any meaningful energy, and with it, the very last ember of an empire based on divine ambition changed into snuffed out. But even in loss of life, Olympus left behind a shadow, and records would never neglect the Serpent Queen. Olympus died now not on a throne, however in the dirt, unarmed, abandoned, and achieved with the aid of the very human beings she once ruled. However, records is atypical. It does now not constantly want the ones who die in silk sheets. Sometimes it recalls individuals who went down hissing, and Olympus changed into never intended for quiet records. In life, she had wielded motherhood like a sword and prophecy like a guard. She wasn't just the mother of Alexander the top-notch. She became one of the architects of his rise. Without her, there's no myth of the divine infant, no rituals whispering of thunderbolts and lions, no ruthless purging of rivals that cleared the course for a teenage king to rule the recognized global. Olympus failed to simply give beginning to an empire. She defended it with claws. Yet, even a number of the ancient international's maximum ruthless dynasts, Olympia stands aside. She failed to command armies in the subject like Cleopatra or ride into struggle like Boudicca. Her battlefield turned into subtler and chillier. It turned into a global of poison goblets, political marriages, priestesses, and oracles. She understood the power of worry, and even greater importantly, she understood the power of belief. She made human beings agree with her son become divine. And she can also have believed it herself. Her enemies branded her an assassin, a witch, a manipulator, and that they weren't incorrect. Olympia became all those matters and more. She was the product of a brutal global that reputable cunning are ways greater than kindness. And she or he discovered early that mercy was a luxurious queens could not manage to pay for. Within the centuries that followed, she turned into each vilified and mythologized. Some called her a villain, others a visionary, but no historian, historic or cutting edge, should call her inappropriate. She haunted the legacy of Alexander like a phantom, always inside the background, continually just behind the curtain. And maybe it truly is precisely where she belonged. Now not as a tragic mom or a footnote in a king's tale, but as a story unto herself, the woman who wrapped herself in prophecy, slept beside snakes, and outlived gods. Olympia's bones grew to become to dust lengthy in the past, but her legend endures in every tale of ruthless queens. In each whisper of blood-born future, in every empire built on delusion, she continues to be there, coiled in the darkish, ready, at the sun-bleached island of Crete, just a few miles south of the modern-day city of Heracleion, lies a destroy that feels greater like a dream than an actual location. Stone corridors snake in all instructions, rooms twist and double again, staircases lead nowhere. It's clean to lose your sense of course even these days. This vicinity is Kenosis, the coronary heart of Minoan civilization, and the intended notion for one of the most enduring myths in human history, the labyrinth of the Minotaur. However, before there has been a legend, there has been a palace. A palace in contrast to another, constructed round 1900 BCE and expanded over centuries. Nos wasn't only a royal residence. It changed into an entire metropolis under one roof, protecting nearly 150,000 square feet. It featured over 1,000 rooms, light wells, garage magazines, shrines, workshops, and what may additionally had been the primary flushing lavatories in records. It had jogging water, multi-tail flats, and a complicated gadget of air circulate. This wasn't a primitive fort. It changed into an architectural masterpiece. To modern archaeologists, Nos seems like organized chaos. To ancient traffic, it likely felt like magic. The man who added Nos into contemporary focus changed into British archaeologist Arthur Evans. Inside the early 1900s, Evans excavated the site and fast have become satisfied that this became the starting place of the Greek labyrinth fable. The format changed into disorienting, the structure deeply symbolic, and everywhere he turned, he located motifs of bulls painted on walls, carved into stone, or sculpted into tiny golden charms. The bull, in the end, changed into sacred to the Minoans. Evans even went to date as to name the civilization after the mythic King Minos. Whether Minos turned into actual or not, his legend became inseparable from the ruins. However, here's the twist. No one's observed a literal labyrinth. No underground maze, no prison chambers, no half-man monster. What we've rather is something some distance greater mysterious. A town designed in loops, wings and layers, deliberately hard to navigate. And the deeper you cross, the extra the traces among history and mythology blur. So the question remains, turned into the Minotaur born from these walls, or turned into the palace itself the monster? Nos may not surrender its answers without problems, but it is excellent at making us ask the right questions. The parable is as well known because the destroy, a enormous half-man. Half of bull trapped in a labyrinth so complicated that nobody who entered ever located their way out. Most effective Theseus, the Athenian hero, controlled to kill the beast and break out way to a ball of thread, and the foxy of Princess Ariane. However, where did this story come from? And why labyrinth? The earliest versions of the myth communicate of King Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete, who demanded tribute from Athens inside the shape of 7 boys and 7 ladies every year. These unlucky souls were fed to the Minotaur, a creature born from divine punishment and disgrace. The Minotaur, locked in an underground maze, symbolized the darkish underbelly of electricity, something savage hidden at the back of grandeur. To ancient Greeks, Crete had long been a land of wealth, mystery, and fear. Its seafaring humans, the Minoans, had been seen as each stylish and alien. Their rituals involved bulloping, their artwork depicted ordinary gods, and their palaces had been in contrast to something on the mainland. To a traveling Greek from 1000 BCE, Nos might have felt like every other international. The bull itself changed into sacred in Minoan culture. Frescoes show younger males and females vaulting over charging bulls in ritual shows. Horns of consecration. Stylized bull horns seem on rooftops and altars. Combine this with a palace that feels like a maze, and the components for a legend begin to stir. But what if the Mena wasn't just a monster? What if it became a metaphor? A few pupils accept, as true with the story reflects a reminiscence of Cretan dominance over the Aeon, a time whilst Athens genuinely did pay tribute to a stronger, stranger power. The labyrinth could signify the political entrapment of weaker states. And the Minotaur, the raw, terrifying force at the back of Minoan rule. Others argue it's greater mental. The labyrinth as the unconscious mind. The Minotaur as our hidden urges, and Theseus the hero walking bravely into the darkness, guided only with the aid of the thread of reminiscence. Nonetheless, the myth stays tangled with Nos. The palace is the nearest thing we've got ever found to an actual labyrinth. No monster, no Ariadne. However, perhaps something deeper. Not only a fable echoing through records, but a records that turned into asking to come to be fable. Lengthy earlier than Athens raised its marble temples or Sparta sharpened its spears, there was the Minoan civilization, one of the earliest advanced societies in Europe. They dominated not through conquest, however via change, artwork, and what seems like an almost supernatural command of structure. At the heart of their strength stood Gnosis, a palace that wasn't only a seat of royalty. It changed into a hub of way of life, ritual and economic system. The Minoans flourished from around 2600 to 400 BCE, based totally on Crete. They developed a sprawling alternate community that reached Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, or even the remote shorelines of Spain. Their ships reduced through the Mediterranean like silent arrows, fing pottery, saffron, bronze, and comfort goods. They didn't construct giant armies. They built relationships, and that extra than guns made them wealthy. What's maximum striking about Minoan tradition is how exceptional it turned into from their later Greek successors. Their paintings celebrated nature, animals, and flowing human motion, not struggle or divine punishment. Fresco show dancers, dolphins, and athletes vaulting over bulls. Even their goddesses are special. Powerful bare-breasted figures regularly holding snakes, symbols of fertility, transformation, or safety. On the center of it all turned into konos. Not a citadel on a hill, however complicated in a fertile valley. It had no large shielding walls, suggesting the Minoans both felt comfortable on their island or projected sufficient electricity to make protection useless. Their self-assurance turned into architectural, multi-tale buildings, colonnaded courtyards, and advanced plumbing structures hinted at a society a ways in advance of its time. And yet, for all their sophistication, the Minoans left behind no deciphered written statistics. Their primary script, Linear A, remains unreadable to this day. We do not know what they known as themselves. We do not know what their kings believed, what prayers they spoke, or what genuinely came about in the back of the partitions of Nos. All we have are their ruins, their artwork, and their impact, absorbed later via the Mycenaeans and echoed in Greek myths. The Minoans were not just builders of palaces, they had been architects of mystery, and Nos wasn't merely a building. It became the beating heart of a civilization that shimmered for a second, like daylight at the age and after which vanished. But some say their echo nonetheless wanders the maze. To stroll through Gnosis is to stroll through time. Layered, difficult, beautiful time. It is not just the size that overwhelms you. It's the layout. Rooms 'cause rooms. Corridors break up and vanish. Light wells cut via the heart of the building. Stairs spiral into shadows or emerge abruptly into sunlit courtyards. Nothing actions in a directly line. It is now not hard to peer why ancient site visitors might have whispered labyrinth. Kossos wasn't only a palace. It was a dwelling organism, spanning an envisioned 150,000 square feet. The complicated contained over 1,000 chambers, some tiny a few grand. These were not randomly located rooms. They have been constructed workshops, garage spaces, shrines, residences, and throne rooms, all arranged round a huge relevant courtyard, which could have hosted public ceremonies or bulling rituals. The palace became built on a couple of ranges up to 4 or 5 stories tall, in places the use of herbal slopes and synthetic terraces. To navigate it without getting lost, you would need reminiscence, intuition, or a thread like Theseus. And yet, this apparent chaos hides a first-rate intelligence. The Minoans mastered passive airflow, cooling rooms via air shafts and open stairwells. They funneled rainwater through clay pipes, and had lavatories that flushed long before Rome made it fashionable. One of the most iconic regions is the So, referred to as throne room, named for the alabaster chair constructed into the wall flanked via benches. Round it a fresco of griffins, legendary guardians. Become this the seat of a priest-king, a goddess's chamber, a sacred court. No one is aware of for sure. And the walls, they speak in colour. Vibrant frescoes show dolphins swimming above bathtubs. Ladies in stylish flounced skirts with bare chests. Youths jumping bulls midair. The art wasn't simply decoration. It became identification. Fluid, herbal, deeply linked to earth and sea. Nonetheless, the deeper you pass, the greater Nose begins to disorient. A few parts appear intentionally complicated, like they have been designed to confuse. Maybe it truly is the foundation of the labyrinth legend. No longer a jail for monsters, but a palace that felt alive. A constructing that invited awe, ritual, and just a touch of fear. No locked doorways, no legendary beasts. Simply an area built to make you question in which you have been, and what turned into ready round the following corner. Nose wasn't simply a place of job or royal house. It became an area of worship, an architectural expression of the Minoan soul, steeped in ritual, delusion, and divine thriller. Not like later Greek temples. There are no towering columns to Zeus or marble shrines to Athena. Alternatively, the non-secular world of kenosis is more diffused, woven into the fabric of the constructing itself. Shrines disguise in corners. Pillars rise like sacred sentinels. Horns stylized, carved, symbolic, seem on rooftops and altars. Anywhere you look, the bull motif dominates, suggesting a powerful connection among worship, the herbal world, and this respected animal. The Minoans didn't seem to worry the bull. They celebrated it. The well-known bull leaping fresco in Nos isn't always simply athletic art. It could depict a non-secular rite. Young women and men vaulting over a charging bull, locked in a dance of chance and charm. It wasn't game. It became sacred theatre, probable and imparting to the gods, or a symbolic conquer chaos. Then there are the snake goddesses observed in save rooms under the palace. The snake goddess collectible figurines are the various most iconic Minoan artifacts. Naked breasted, hands raised, with serpents coiled in their arms or around their bodies, these figures radiate energy. They are not submissive idols. They may be guardians of the family, fertility and perhaps life itself. To the Minoans, snakes symbolized renewal, rebirth and mystery. Creatures of both earth and underworld. The rooms wherein these objects had been found hint at family shrines or ritual areas, quiet, sacred corners hidden among the palace's bustling heart. Combined with the fresco, the horns, the altars, and the labyrinthine corridors, the whole complicated starts to experience like a ritual gadget, a structure constructed now not just for living, however for connecting with the divine. There may be no centralized temple at Nos because the palace itself was a temple. Its format, artwork, and layout were all a part of a non-secular worldview, wherein boundaries among sacred and secular did not exist. This was a place in which fable becomes structure, wherein a corridor could emerge as a passage to the gods, and in which each echo inside the stone chambers might also have as soon as been a whispered prayer. Nos didn't simply house humans, it housed gods. For centuries, Nos stood as a beacon of prosperity, innovation, and cultural sophistication. However then, something passed off, something sudden, something nobody can fully explain. By way of round 1, 400 BCE, the palace changed into deserted. The fresco left to fade, and the Minoan civilization that once dominated the seas had vanished like mist over the Aeon. So what befell? Theories abound. A few point to nature. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, erupted in one among the biggest explosions in human records. The blast became so massive it probably triggered tsunamis that battered Sit's northern coast, devastating ports and farmland. Ash clouds can also have blocked the sun, choking vegetation and disrupting the weather. At the same time as Knossos wasn't immediately destroyed, the aftermath of the eruption may additionally have shaken the foundations economically, politically, and spiritually. Others look to war. Via 1450 BCE, the growing electricity of the Messenians, mainland Greeks, may have taken gain of Minoan weak spot. Archaeological evidence indicates Nos become reoccupied briefly, but the lifestyle had changed. The artwork became more martial. Linear A, the Minoan script, become changed with Linear B, utilized by Messenian scribes. The palace that after thrived with snake goddesses and bull dancers now whispered in a foreign tongue. Some scholars agree with the Messenians, did not invade in a single conquest, but progressively absorbed the island, first through trade, then have an impact on, and finally rule. Others argue that internal crumble, a civil uprising, political instability, or the failure of the elite might also have contributed just as an awful lot. What is hanging even though is how little violence is evident within the ruins. There are no charred skeletons, no symptoms of mass slaughter. Nos failed to fall with a scream. It fell with a whisper. The awesome palatial machine genuinely stopped. The rooms went quiet. The rituals ended, and nature slowly returned in. By the time Homer sang of Cree in his epics, Nos changed into already ancient fantasy. A memory tangled in memories of kings, monsters, and labyrinths. And perhaps it's fitting due to the fact what killed Konos wasn't simply eruption or invasion. It turned into time, and the manner all super matters, regardless of how stunning, finally vanish underneath the weight of latest empires. However, the bones remain. And if you concentrate carefully, the maze nonetheless hums below the earth. For hundreds of years, Knossos lay buried below the Cretan soil. Just every other mound of stone misplaced to time. Its call forgotten, its myths distorted, its walls swallowed via olive groves and dirt. This is till one guy determined to chase a legend. His call was Sir Arthur Evans, and he did not just rediscover Knossos, he reimagined it. In 1900, Evans, a British archaeologist with a flair for drama and a deep love for Homeric fable, purchased the land that protected the historical ruins. Neighborhood farmers have been locating strange seals and artifacts, clues that something good-sized lay underneath their faith. Evans dug in. What he located might trade the records of the Aeon for all time. He exposed a palace so widespread, so complicated, and so advanced that he turned into convinced this changed into the legendary home of King Minos. The fresco, the horns, the sheer architectural strangeness of the website, it all pointed in his thoughts to one aspect, the labyrinth. Evans wasn't simply an archaeologist. He was a storyteller, and sometimes an arguable one. He named those who constructed Konos the Manoans after Minos. He interpreted symbols, reconstructed fresco, and restored parts of the palace the usage of strengthened concrete, a circulate that has drawn both praise and criticism. Some name it visionary, others call it vandalism. Due to the fact what you see nowadays at Knossos is partly historical spoil and partly Edgewardian imagination. Nonetheless, Evans did what no person else had dared. He brought Knossos back to lifestyles. He gave Europe a glimpse into a Bronze Age international, a long way older than classical Greece, a civilization of art, mystery, and maritime beauty. He additionally unearthed the still undeciphered linear script, opening new questions about language, literacy, and the bounds of our historical information. But Evans did extra than excavate stone. He resurrected a fantasy and pressured historians to reckon with the fact that at the back of the legend of the labyrinth became something actual, something complex, something very human, a palace that felt like a maze, a civilization that slipped into shadow, and a person who peeled returned the earth, handies to find out a tale some distant stranger and greater lovely than he had imagined. Knossos had slept for 3,000 years. Evans rang the bell that woke it up. Stroll via Knossos and you're no longer simply on foot via architecture. You're strolling via a language of symbols. Fresco, carvings, patterns, they may be everywhere. However, the Manoans failed to depart us a Rosetta Stone. Their number one script, Linear A, remains undeciphered. So as opposed to reading their thoughts, we must see them painted across plaster, carved into partitions, and hidden in styles. What precisely were they trying to mention? The art of Knossos is not like something in the historical international. There may be no obsession with battle, no rows of kings or battle-hardened heroes. As a substitute, we discover nature, jumping dolphins, blooming lies, birds in flight, and sacred bulls. The humans are alive, fashionable, and regularly dancing or appearing rituals. Even in scenes that advocate danger, there's rhythm and beauty. The Manoans were not chronicling conquests. They were celebrating life cycles and possibly cosmic order. The most iconic image, although, is the double awl or labris, determined throughout Knossos in shrines, on fresco, even etched into stones. The double awl is thought to be a spiritual image, possibly tied to lady divinity or celestial cycles. A few propose the very word labyrinth may derive from labais, making the labyrinth not a maze at all, but a house of the double axe, a sacred space, now not a lure. Then there are the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns positioned at top walls and altars. These can also have been spiritual markers isolating sacred area from the mundane. Mixed with common depictions of bulls and bull-leaping rituals, it is clear the animal had deep religious importance. Whether it represented nature, fertility, chaos, or a divine presence, nobody agrees, but the bull is everywhere. Even the layout of Knossos may have symbolic that means. A few archaeologists trust it changed into built not just for feature, however to reflect celestial or seasonal patterns. Its winding corridors and nested rooms should represent a journey through lifestyles, through dying, via the underworld. A religious maze, now not a physical prison. However, without a deciphered script, every concept walks a thin line between insight and imagination. The Manoans spoke in symbols, no longer testimonies. And so we're left to interpret. What is Knossos pronouncing? We listen the rhythms. We see the photos, however that means that remains just out of attain, like a thread unraveling into delusion. Knossos is a damage, yes, however it doesn't feel useless. Walk its corridors nowadays, and you will experience something buzzing simply below the floor. Not ghosts, now not gods, however echoes of myths, of lives, of questions that refuse to go away. Thousands of years after its fall, Knossos nonetheless holds us in its maze. Travelers wander its halls, archaeologists dig for solutions, and writers spin new memories stimulated by using its shadow. The Minotaur can be fable, however the feeling of the labyrinth is actual. We don't know who ruled Knossos. We do not know the names of its kings, queens, or clergymen. We don't know the prayers they whispered, or the laws they lived with the aid of. However, we know they cherished splendor. We realize they worship nature. We understand they understood balance between structure and art, between ritual and fact. And we recognize they have been the first, before the Parthenon, before Rome, earlier than the Hebrew temples or the Persian palaces. There was Gnosis, a palace that became additionally a metropolis, a city that became also a temple which could have additionally been a story, because possibly that's what the labyrinth honestly is. Not a prison, not a puzzle, but a narrative carved in stone, a myth in architectural shape. The legend of the Minotaur didn't get up from nothing. It got here from this region, from the confusion of its corridors, the reverence of its bull rituals, and the awe it stimulated in generations who tried to make feel of it. The Greeks grew to become it into a story. We became it into archaeology, but at its middle, Nos has usually been each. These days, we will stroll its ruins in large daytime. We will take pictures, draw maps, or even reconstruct its fresco. However, the thriller hasn't vanished. The road among reality and legend nonetheless shimmers like heat over stone. Perhaps it truly is why Gnosis endures, because it does not give us all of the solutions. It reminds us that from time to time records isn't always intended to be solved. It's meant to be felt. And No's historical, tangled half of remembered isn't always just an area on a map. It's a question, one which leads us deeper with each step. And like Theseus, we're all still following the thread. Historical engineers knew precisely what they have been doing. The earliest rams had been handheld. Groups of infantrymen absolutely lifted a tree trunk and smashed it towards enemy defenses like frenzied lumberjacks. But over the years, the battering ram advanced. Engineers found out that mounting the ram internal a wheeled frame, regularly with a roof to protect the group from arrows and boiling oil, turned it from a device into a weapon of terror. The Assyrians, masters of siege battle, turned rams into psychological guns. Their siege towers combined rams with archer structures, which means a metropolis's gates were being destroyed at the same time as defenders were beneath steady fireplace. Relief carvings from Nineveh show rams with pointed iron suggestions, rolling as much as the gates of rebellious cities, like slow-moving gods of destruction. And it wasn't just the front door they had been smashing. Rams have been frequently used to breach susceptible points in walls, batter down watchtowers, or fall apart gateways absolutely. Their presence meant one thing: surrender or watch your defenses collapse like stale bread. The Greeks delicate them. The Romans perfected them. Roman engineers built huge rams called ares, Latin for ram, suspended with chains or ropes internal great siege shelters. A few were so huge they wanted dozens of guys to function, and the rhythm in their swinging beam becomes stated to sound like thunder rolling throughout stone. But, for all their brute force, battering rams required critical teamwork. Operators had to maintain the ram swinging in sync, while also protecting it from burning missiles, stones, and all manner of foul substances hurled from above. A stalled ram changed into a dead ram. Nonetheless, whilst a battering ram got going, in reality going, it turned into unstoppable timber muscle as opposed to human masonry. It became historic physics weaponized, and it became only the beginning of the way engineers would make walls weep. If the battering ram changed into the brute, the catapult became the tactician. Wherein rams smashed close up, catapults attacked from a distance, launching no longer just stones, however mental drain. They have been the first real artillery pieces in Navy history, and they revolutionized siege warfare by using weaponizing physics in approaches that felt almost magical to the enemy. The earliest catapults emerged from the Greek international across the 4th century BCE, and manufactured from first-rate minds who desired to feature variety and momentum to conflict. Dionysius the Fur of Syracuse, a tyrant with a taste for cutting-edge violence, commissioned the first torsion-powered catapults, devices that used twisted bundles of sinew or hair as tension springs. These were not slingshots for giants. They had been particular units of siege terror. The genius lay of their mechanics. Engineers found out that by using twisting ropes tightly, often made from animal sinew, they could keep good-sized quantities of capacity power. Whilst released, this force could hurl stones, javelins, or maybe flaming projectiles masses of meters. The two main types developed speedy: the ballista, which released big bolts like a giant crossbow, and the stoner-throwing catapult, which lobbed boulders over partitions, or immediately at fortifications. Then got here the Roman engineers, who never met a Greek idea they could not improve. They constructed catapults that could be broken down, packed onto carts, and reassembled on website online. Portable siege engines for expert armies. Some Roman catapults could hearth 60 elb stones at splendid speeds, capable of tearing through wood gates. Battlements, and on occasion unlucky soldiers. Catapults were not pretty much destruction. They had been approximately spectacle. Ancient generals used them to ship messages, now and again literally. Corpses have been launched over walls to spread sickness and fear. Severed heads have been lobbed into besieged cities to shatter morale. In a single chilling case, diseased bodies had been fired into enemy territory as an early form of organic battle. However, catapults had their flaws. They have been heavy, required skilled crews, and might be rendered vain by awful terrain. Nonetheless, whilst set up well, they may batter a city into submission from a secure distance. And for the primary time in history, cities found out their thick stone partitions didn't just need to withstand a ram. They needed to continue to exist the skies. Due to the fact now destruction got here flying. If the catapult became clever, the trebuchet changed into majestic. Towering, creaking, and terrifying, it became the undisputed king of medieval siege war. While one appeared at the battlefield, it wasn't only a weapon. It became a declaration. It stated, "Your partitions imply not anything." Not like its tension-powered cousins. The trebuchet depended on gravity. At its core became an easy precept. A long swinging arm installed on a sturdy frame with a heavy counterweight on one end and a sling on the alternative. Raise the weight, let it drop, and the arm might whip round, flinging the sling and its lethal payload in an excessive arc over enemy defenses. It was controlled destruction, particular, predictable, and devastating. The beginning of the trebuchet may be traced again to early traction models utilized by the Chinese language as early as the 4th century BCE, in which manpower changed counterweights. However, the counterweight trebuchet, the model that would rewrite siege struggle in Europe and the Islamic International, emerged in the 12th century, likely through Byzantine or Muslim intermediaries. As soon as Europe got its hands at the layout, it unfolded like wildfire through castles and crusades. The power changed into astounding. A nicely built trebuchet should release 300 lb projectiles over 300 mm. Stones the dimensions of furniture might crash into towers, pulverize partitions, or crater enemy morale. But the real magic changed into in the arc. Unlike catapults, trebuchets should hurl projectiles over partitions with finesse. This meant they were not just smashing defenses. They had been hitting courtyards, barracks, and delivered depots inner. And it wasn't simply stones. Trebuchets hurled everything. Diseased animals, burning pitch, pots of lime to blind defenders, even messages or insults wrapped around rocks. One legendary account from the siege of Stirling Fortress in Scotland tells of Warwolf. A trebuchet so massive that the enemy surrendered earlier than it became even fired. The king refused to simply accept the give-up just so he could check the system. However, for all its adverse glory, the trebuchet wasn't fast. It took hours to build, minutes to reload, and demanded professional engineers. Still, no different siege weapon combined range, pressure, and mental horror quite adore it. It became the medieval model of a sluggish motion hammer from the heavens. And whilst that counterweight dropped, towns held their breath, at the same time as catapults released from afar and battering rams smashed the gates. Siege towers took an extra non-public approach. They rolled right as much as the enemy's front door and dropped off armed invaders. Consider a wood skyscraper on wheels covered in moist hides to prevent hearth, bristling with archers and spearmen. That turned into the siege tower, the historical equivalent of an armored employees provider and a mobile fort in one. And while this type of commenced rumbling closer to your city walls, you knew that the actual combat turned into about to begin. Siege towers were not diffused. They have been massive, bold, and terrifyingly effective whilst used nicely. The Assyrians may also have been most of the first to install them within the 9th century BCE, but it changed into the Greeks and in particular the Hellenistic kingdoms that took the layout to theatrical extremes. During the siege of Rhodes in 305 BCE, the Macedonian fashionable Demetrius built a 9-story tower called the Helpolis, or Taker of Towns. It was over 100 feet tall, geared up with catapults included in iron plates, and moved by using hundreds of soldiers. It additionally broke underneath its own weight, but the ambition unrivaled. The common sense in the back of siege towers changed into simple. Walls simplest work in case you cannot get over them. Siege towers eliminated that gain through creating a multiplied platform from which attackers ought to descend onto the battlements, bypassing gates and scaling ladders. From the top deck, archers should rain loss of life down onto defenders, at the same time as troops at the lower degrees organized to board. But those towers weren't invincible. They had been slow, liable to dust, and high targets for defenders with fire arrows, rolling boulders, or maybe sabotage terrain. Smart defenders could dig ditches, flood mows, or build secondary inner partitions, known as counter-scarp defenses, just to prevent a tower's approach. Still, once they labored spectacularly. A breach in the wall turned into one aspect. However, having your own rampart abruptly crowded with enemy squaddies, that became chaos. Siege towers transformed the battlefield from a horizontal contest of energy to a vertical race for survival. They made top an asset and a liability, and as soon as the group plank dropped from a siege tower to the metropolis partitions, there was no turning back. It became time for hand-to-hand hell, while rams smashed and trebuchets soared. Some of the maximum devastating siege methods passed off silently underground. Siege tunneling or sapping become the darkish artwork of defeating a city via doing away with the ground it stood on. Actually, the concept became historical and horrifyingly effective. Dig underneath the enemy's wall, prop it up with wood supports, then set those helps on hearth. While the timbers burned away, the tunnel collapsed, taking the inspiration of the wall with it. One moment, your town stood strong. The subsequent, a big phase of the outer wall crumbled like stale bread. This technique didn't appearance superb. There were no grand engines or thunderous launches, but tunneling was the sluggish, invisible killer of fort conflict. The Assyrians practiced early variations of it, but the approach reached full maturity with the Greeks, Persians, and later medieval EQ armies. At some point of the siege of Plato in 429 BCE, the Spartans attempted tunneling below the partitions, most effective for the defenders to dig counter-tunnels and intercept them mid-dig, turning the soil right into a knife combat nightmare. This defensive tactic had become called countermining, and it introduced an eerie element to siege warfare. Consider soldiers digging in pitch black, masses of eft underneath the earth, listening for the sound of enemy selections. The moment they heard tapping, they'd race to intercept, regularly resulting in violent, claustrophobic skirmishes fought by torchlight with knives and shovels. There was no glory in it, just terror, suffocation, and dirt. But when undermining worked, the effects have been catastrophic. One of the maximum infamous examples came in 1212 in the course of the siege of Rochester Fortress in England. King John's forces tunneled below the southern wall, packed the mine with pig fats, and set it ablaze. The supports collapsed, bringing down the entire tower above. The defenders had been stunned, and soon after surrendered. Through the 13th century, siege engineers became specialists in identifying vulnerable foundations, measuring the soil's conduct, and planning collapses with terrifying precision. They were geologists and demolitionists rolled into one. And even though tunneling required time, exertions, and a chunk of madness, it proved one fact approximately siege warfare. In case you couldn't pass over the wall, and you could not undergo it, you may continually take it down from beneath. No longer all the drama of siege conflict got here from the attackers. For every ram constructed or tower rolled ahead, defenders had their very own deadly hints, and occasionally the ones' hints have been hot. Allows begin with the maximum terrifying of all of them, Greek fire. Advanced by the Byzantine around the 7th century CE, Greek fire was a mysterious napalm-like substance that would keep on with ships, walls, and flesh and kept burning even on water. Sprayed from siphons or hurled in clay pots, it created scenes of natural chaos. At the present time, no one is aware of precisely the way it was made. The formula was so secret that it died with the empire, but its consequences mythical. Whole fleets have been decreased to flaming skeletons within minutes. And that was just the begin. In more low-tech defenses, boiling beverages were the cross to weapons of choice. Boiling water, oil, or sand could be poured from homicide holes, the once quaint openings within the ceilings of gateways or towers directly onto invaders under. Oil turned into specifically feared, not like water. It clung to skin, soaking into clothes and armor earlier than being set alight. Believe mountaineering a siege ladder, only to be greeted with hearth you may in no way put out. Warm sand, even though less dramatic, changed into vicious in its very own proper. It'd slip into the gaps of armor, specifically around the neck or wrists, causing second and third diploma burns as it cooked the flesh below. It did not look spectacular from a distance, but it became formidable warriors into screaming wrecks in seconds. Defenders additionally relied on the best vintage legal guidelines of physics. Gravity have become a weapon. Giant stones, logs, or maybe dead animals have been dropped from parapets onto siege engines or dense formations of troops. The purpose wasn't simply to kill. It changed into to break the machines and morale immediately. And then there had been traps. Hidden pits, collapsing bridges, spiked barricades. Castles became puzzles of ache designed to slow, confuse, and punish. All of this served one purpose: delay. Every minute a wall held become a minute in the direction of enemy deliver lines jogging thin, to sickness spreading in camps, or to reinforcements arriving. Siege warfare became a recreation of attrition, and while the attackers had physics on their aspect, the defenders had creativity and a whole lot of boiling rage. In siege struggle, raw destruction changed into most effective half the purpose. The other half turned into psychological domination, breaking the need of the defenders earlier than the partitions even got here down. Siege weapons were not just equipment of war. They were huge, creaking, flaming symbols of doom. Each groaning wheel of a siege tower, each arsing boulder, flung via a trebuchet, turned into design to plant one seed in the minds of those at the back of the walls. You are not secure. Historic commanders knew this. The Assyrians paraded their siege engines brazenly, dragging them throughout deserts with grand fanfare. The Romans constructed their siege camps proper in view of the enemy, letting defenders watch as battering rams have been assembled and catapults tested. Siege changed into theatre, and worry became part of the script. Every now and then the payloads themselves carried a message. Severed heads of messengers or generals could be launched over the partitions, regularly still carrying their armor. On the siege of Constantinople, defenders had been bombarded not handiest with rocks, however with our bodies. Diseased corpses launched to spread panic and plague. At some point of the Mongol siege of Kaffa in 1346, it is believed that hurling plague infected corpses over the partitions helped trigger outbreaks of the black loss of life in Europe. The trebuchet wasn't only a weapon. It was an announcement. While the sort of giants become rolled into location, absolutely everyone within the fortress ought to pay attention it earlier than they noticed it. The creaking of winches, the grinding of ropes, the heavy thunk of the counterweight, just like the heartbeat of an incoming storm. But the most dangerous component, the unknown. You by no means knew what became coming next. Wouldn't it be a rock, a barrel of fireplace, a rain of arrows, or simply silence? Ominous, heavy silence as engineers adjusted their intention. Even the sounds became mental guns. The rhythmic thump of a battering ram, or the sudden silence before a shot could power defenders mad with anticipation. For commanders, the aim became to create melancholy, to convince the enemy that resistance become useless, that their gods had deserted them, that their partitions have been nothing however temporary barriers within the direction of fate. And while that intellectual dam ultimately cracked, the gates frequently opened without a combat, because in siege battle, now and again the thoughts collapsed earlier than the masonry. As gunpowder thundered onto the battlefield, within the overdue medieval technology, the age of conventional siege engines got here to a gradual, splintering give up, but their legacy failed to vanish. It evolved. The invention of cannons changed the entirety. Unmarried properly, located shot from a cannon could do in seconds what a trebuchet took hours to attain. Stone walls, as soon as taken into consideration impenetrable, have become liabilities. Through the 15th century, the notable castles of Europe had been crumbling, not from undermining or fireplace, however from iron balls crashing through their parapets. Siege struggle had entered its subsequent phase, explosive, brutal, and deafening. And yet, the concepts laid down by using ancient siege engineers in no way disappeared. Current artillery nonetheless owes a debt to the catapult and trebuchet. Each ballistic missile and long-range howitzer is only a high, tech descendant of the same question. How do you spoil what is meant to be unbreakable from a distance? Physics, trajectory, tension, and pressure, all discovered, examined, and perfected centuries before gunpowder ever entered the story. Even army psychology today, surprise and awe, overwhelming firepower, visible dominance, has its roots in historic siege methods. The once towering siege engines rolling ahead with flags snapping inside the wind have been the authentic shock and awe. They weren't just about breaching a wall. They had been about breaking the spirit of a metropolis. You can still see their legacy etched into the ruins of ancient towns. At Sada, in which Roman siege ramps still scar the desolate tract. At Constantinople, where layers of partitions stood for 1,000 years against every device possible, till cannon fireplace eventually introduced them down at castles across Europe, where spherical towers and angled bastions inform the story of an international constantly remodeling itself to continue to exist the subsequent siege. And these days, even in a world of drones and satellite-guided missiles, siege conflict hasn't vanished. It has just gone digital. Towns are nonetheless surrounded. Defenders are still isolated. Partitions at the moment are firewalls, blockades, or even media blackouts. However, the soul of the siege stays the identical. A person wants in. Someone wants to keep them out, and each are inclined to attend, build, and ruin to win. The battering rams are long gone. The trebuchets are museum portions. However, the spirit of siege conflict, it is as alive and as detrimental as ever.